Now we welcome in Niki Lattarulo with KCEN Channel 6, weekend sports anchor, reporter, kind of do it all. Niki, how are you doing?
I'm good, just staying busy. It's cold and snowing, but we still got a lot going on. We got girls basketball playoffs, and then the Lady Bears are still playing, so we're getting less now that the men are off for this time, but dog squeaks the football toy. But yeah, we're staying busy for sure.
Well, that's great. Thank you for joining me in the minor lounge. Doing a little media blitz this week, trying to get the media personalities on the show and tell their story. Get your thoughts on the Baylor basketball teams, both men and women. While the men are postponed, the women are still going, but. You're doing a lot of other things with playoffs, high school playoffs. You cover over 60 high schools as well as the Big 12 and Baylor. What's it been like? And now with the snow, you're saying that, pretty much everything's iced over there in Waco.
Yeah, which is rare. People are not used to it. I'm used to it, but people aren't used to it. But it's been good. I think the transition from high school football into basketball season is like quick. So it's like high school football ends, and then while high school football playoffs in state are going on, obviously the Lady Bears and the men are already playing. But then by the time we start like fully honing in on it, it's like conference play already. And this year it's been like more confusing with there's the makeup games and all that kind of stuff. And then now the girls basketball for high schools in playoffs, they're on the by districts. And then I think next week the boys go into playoffs. So it's like, once March comes, it's just going to be a whole everything going on at once, because then UMHB is starting to play football. They just had their first game last week because they're moved into the spring. So we have that going on. So it's kind of different than, last year at this time, everything was normal and then it got canceled. So we're like, we haven't gone through a full March, April yet with when I was even working here. So this is my first. Well, at this time last year was, and then it got canceled. So we'll see. Hopefully we'll make it through this year.
Right. Yeah. That's so wild to think about and interesting. How are you best, working to juggle everything? Because anything could be canceled at the drop of a hat, rescheduled, made up. And, how do you manage that, balance that busy schedule?
I think that last year, because when I first got hired here, I was hired as the number 3. So I was half news and half sports. So last year I was like getting thrown in when Nick, who was our sports director at the time, and Curtis, who's now the sports director, he was in my position. When they went on the road, I was anchoring all the time. So when they went to Sugar Bowl, when they did all because football obviously was a lot better last year. So they were covering the postseason stuff, and then they were allowed to travel last year. So I was anchoring a lot more. So I didn't feel like I was even doing news at all. And then I got promoted to be weekend sports anchor once football started this year. So I haven't really been full sports during a basketball season yet. So now it's even like, I think it's easier because last year I was trying to juggle doing sports and news while they were on the road. And now it's just like I could fully focus. And so I feel like I'm more educated on both of the teams, the players, the stats, everything, when last year I wasn't ever at really the game. So I was trying to catch up when I was not doing news on what was going on, and then everything was getting canceled. So I feel like this year I know way more about the teams. I never really knew about Baylor because I was not from here. So I knew who the coaches were and who some of the good players were. But now I feel like I'm a Baylor basketball expert because that's all I really focus on. Especially I live right near the school, so I'm the one at all the games and all the media availabilities. So it's hard to juggle, but at the same time it's kind of, I feel like I'm just expecting things to get canceled all the time. I'm like, okay, tomorrow I'm going to the game, but will I be at the game? I don't know. At first it was oh my God, are you kidding me? Another one is canceled. What are we going to do now? Now it's okay, if it's canceled, then you just talk about how it's canceled. It's really, you can't really stress about it because it can happen. Who would have thought 5 of their games, right? 5 straight are going to be postponed. Yeah, and are they even going to finish? So, are they going to come back against Oklahoma State? I don't know. We just don't know.
Yeah.
So it's hard, but also I feel like it's just what we are used to now. You're okay, it might be canceled. There might be media availability. There might not be.
Right, and you're right there by the school. It's weird for me, like, right, if I'm trying to plan ahead to get a media credential, and then it's like, crickets. I hear crickets.
And or you're like on your way and it's canceled. Like if you have to drive 3 hours, like you might get there and it's canceled.
Yeah. Or for me, like I've been submitting some requests and haven't heard back right away, and then I get the news that it's canceled.
Exactly. You're like, oh, it's actually canceled. Yeah. So it's definitely a hit or miss for sure.
Yeah, no kidding. And you're Baylor basketball, kind of Baylor newbie, right? Kind of the second year in. You're from New Jersey originally, right?
Mm-hmm.
So and you went to Rhode Island. So what made you go from New Jersey? What led you to do Central Texas, to Waco, Texas?
Well, just with this industry, you kind of know that if you want to be on air, you're probably not going to be anywhere near home unless you're in, like if you're from Texas, you can go to like Abilene or one of those like smaller markets. But where I'm from, our market's New York City. So I was like, okay, unless I'm being an assignment desk editor or like a producer you can probably get, I was like, I don't want to stay here and do something behind the scenes, because then once like that window closes for me where I stop being on air, I'm not going to get better. I'm just going to be like worse. And then I'm going to have to go to an even smaller market. So I was like, right out of school, let me just go. And I applied to probably like over 100 places. And I went like on interviews everywhere, and it was just like nothing. I needed to make sure I was going to be comfortable in the area before I actually just look at the job, because coming out of school and going to the middle of nowhere is probably not the best idea, coming from like New York City and like Boston. So this was like the last place I had interviewed, like I had flown to like 5 or 6 places before this, and I just kept turning them down because I was like, I'm not going to be happy here. Like I would rather just like wait. And then the girl, Jessica, that was in the job I have now, was leaving. She's now Oklahoma State. She was like, it's half news, half sports. Like she posted on Facebook in a Facebook group, and I was like, and I didn't like news at all. I was like really against doing news, but this was like a normal area with good sports. And I was like, okay, let me just see. And then I interviewed, and I was like, I loved everyone. And the news, like the cons of doing news, like were outweighed by the pros of like how good the sports are here and like the high school football and everything. So I only did that for a year, because then our sports director ended up leaving. So they moved me up anyway. So it was like, it worked out. And then plus with Corona, I would have been doing news regardless if my position was even had any news in it. So last year, like just really doesn't count. It kind of like, I was supposed to be here till August of this year, and now I'm going to be here till May of 2022. So I added like a few more months just so I could like get the full experience of hopefully next year football season we'll be able to travel. And then hopefully next year's March Madness is like with fans, and we're like traveling to all different locations, not just one place. So I'm happy that I'll have like that full year of everything that's like going to hopefully be normal. We don't know. I'm just hoping. Right.
We can, like you said before, we kind of just don't know. It's just.
And it's like normal now. We're just like, oh, will we travel? Will we not? Like, will these teams even go? Will someone have an outbreak and it gets canceled? Like, will there be a Big 12 tournament? Like, we just don't know.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's really cool. So you knew this is the industry you wanted to be in from the get-go. Is that why you chose Rhode Island and studied that there?
No, my parents were like pushing for me to go to like Syracuse or one of the schools that had those like powerhouse journalism programs, but I didn't know. I honestly like probably should have done more research when I was in high school, but at the same time, like I wanted to go to the school that was like the most fun and like where I felt the most comfortable. And I honestly, like the major and everything was like the last thing I thought of, because to me, I was like, if there's a journalism program or if there's a communications program, like I'll get the same degree. Like I didn't really think about the fact that like my school didn't have a studio, or like we didn't have like reporting classes. Like all we had was like journalism written classes. So my major was communications, but it ended up working out because, the long story short, I worked with the athletic department. I was like, can I just like report for you guys? Like you don't have to pay me. I'll just like come and report. And they were like, I guess, like they never had anyone do that. So they were like, here's a camera. Like it was like a tiny little like Sony camera. They were like, yeah. So I just like ordered a mic flag, and I just like went around with the team and did like interviews and packages and stuff. And it ended up working in my favor because they built a studio, because so many people were like, well, how is she doing that? Like, I want to do that. That's what I want to do. And they were like, she just does it. Like she doesn't, that's not for a class or anything. And now they have like a $2 million studio someone donated, and like they have a whole sports communications major now, broadcasting, all the stuff that they didn't have until I was a senior. They were like, oh, a lot of people want to do this. So I ended up like kind of like paving the way for a lot of students at Rhode Island. Now there's so many people that are going into this industry. So I feel like I wouldn't have been able to make that big of a mark on anyone if I was at a bigger school where I would have been just like every other student that wanted to be a sports reporter. And I think that whole like journey I had helped me get a job, because I was like, listen, you could tell that I actually want to do this. Like I didn't go on spring break. I like traveled to the A10 tournament with the basketball team and like reported, didn't get paid. Like my parents had to pay for me to go. It was like, I was just like trying so hard to get reps on air because I didn't have classes that did anything on air. Like we didn't have teachers that were reporters or anything. So, but I wouldn't change any of that because I like loved my college experience. Like my friends and everything was like the best time. So that's what I always tell people. Like, it doesn't matter like what school you go to, as long as you have like the drive to do it, then you'll be able to do it. It's fine. Like I've ended up in a lot of in a higher market than a lot of people that went to schools where like they were being taught everything that I had to teach myself. It doesn't really matter where you go to school, just like how your on-air presence is, your like mental, like how bad you want it, because clearly like, you know, this industry is like so cutthroat and like you can't really, your schedule's crazy and you're so far from home. But so it's kind of just like how hard you work rather than what school you got your degree from, because the degree is the same. They don't really look even at your classes or anything.
Right. And how cool is that? How cool is that? Just basically, you basically spearheaded and started what is now, I'm sure, a brilliant journalism center at Rhode Island, and kind of inspired others. It sounds like how I think we've seen women in sports media and women's in sports grow over the past couple of years here, and I think it's phenomenal. Has anybody how do you view yourself in your position as a role model for like other young girls or people that want to be in your shoes?
I think that the people that like the reporters in not bigger markets, but like the national reporters, like Tracy Wolfson and Diana Rossini, they're like from where I live. Like they're from like 10 minutes away from where I live. So I've always watched them being like, oh, they're from here. Like I could do that. How did they get there? Some of them started in news or doing barely even in the industry, and they just like worked their way up. So I never had, I guess as a girl, I never had that thought of like, it's harder because you're a girl. Like I never, like that never crossed my mind, because I always loved the Yankees team reporters like Meredith Morakovitz, and Kim Jones was like the first girl that I like loved as a reporter. So I never thought of it. I kind of was like, oh, girls are sideline reporters. Like I never was like, it's going to be harder. I was like, oh, I can get a sideline reporter job, probably more than a guy even, because like the only sideline reporters I knew were girls. And then as you get older, you kind of are like, oh, there's a lot more hurdles than you think when you're younger. You just see them like on ESPN, you're like, oh, I'm going to do that. But I think I've learned definitely that you're going to get more hate than guys, just because like people always have something to say, but it doesn't really bother me because I like know that I'm like overly qualified to be doing my job. Like, it's not like I got my job because I like knew someone, or because like people are like, oh, girls just get their jobs because they're a girl, or because they wear this or that, or they look like this. But I feel like with me, I just like from a young age knew I wanted to do this, and it never crossed my mind that it would be, I didn't know what I was talking about. I just got the job because like I wore tight dresses, like what people try to say to you on social media. So I think like I don't have any like insecurities in the sense of like my job that I don't know what I'm talking about. But I think a lot of girls do, and they get like nervous about the comments that people are saying, and then they take it to heart, which it's easy to take things to heart. But I just don't, because I'm like, these are internet trolls. Like they don't know me, and they're only saying this to me because I'm a girl, and they just like, they don't like girls working in sports, so they're just like taking out the anger on me. So I think I talk to like classes and stuff at Rhode Island, and then like people will ask me to come into their class at other schools, and I just say like, as long as you're not posting anything inappropriate, and not that you shouldn't be allowed to post what you want, but you just have to be extra careful when you're a girl, because one false move, people will turn everything against you. But like, as long as you're being like professional and not giving anyone a reason to have something to say, and and you know what you're talking about, and you work as hard as you can, like you're fine. Like you're highly qualified to be in your spot. So you can't like let what people say get to you and make you quit your job or make you stop doing it, or like you fight back on social media. Like I never go back to people.
Yeah.
It's like I'm not doing anything wrong.
Right.
So it's like you're just like mad that I'm even having this job. But then like people don't even know how hard it actually is to be like an MMJ. Especially as a girl, it's harder as a girl because you're carrying all your equipment yourself,
Right.
and then you're just supposed to look good, have your hair and makeup done. It's like 95 degrees, and like for a guy, it's easier because you just wipe the sweat. You got short hair. For a girl, it's like your makeup sweating off. You have your long hair, trying to carry everything, and then you're also alone somewhere at like 11 o'clock p.m., which is just like, it's just different if you're a guy. So it's like I think it's even a little bit harder, which makes it even more like rewarding when you do it. Yeah. And when you do a good job, it's like I did that myself. So
right, it could be 90 95 degrees, it could be 0 degrees like it is now outside.
No, now it's like even worse because then you're wearing a hat and you're like your hair's all messed up.
Right. That kind of leads me into this other question thought I had, because often it is like reporting after the game kind of in the cold and the dark with all the equipment and trying to think of what to say and like kind of internalizing that. How do you, like, what's your process when you're going through that to, basically it's a 90-second clip and, you're trying to be perfect and you're trying to be on a deadline. What's your process to, because, you do a great job at it. What's the process? What's the secret of how you kind of work on it? It's like, all right, I need to say X, Y, Z.
Yeah, I think for me, I'm still like early in my career where I like to have everything written down. And Curtis, who's my boss, he's like very good at talking like off the cuff. I could talk off the cuff, but I'll like ramble kind of. If I don't have like so like a lot of reporters that have been in the business for a while, they'll have like the stats written down, the score and like the leading score or whatever, and then they can just do a 2-minute hit that sounds perfectly scripted. With me, if it's not pre-recorded, you don't know how long you can talk. It's easy for me to just be like, go on and on and on. And then they're like, rap. And I'm like, oh, I didn't say any of the stuff I wanted to say. Like, I'm just going on and on. But for like, if I'm in a 6 o'clock show before the game, I'll have everything written out because I have to like time it out to 1:30, around 1:30. But after the games, I will try to write out like my intro. So then once the video comes up, I can like look down on my phone and just like read the stats and then like talk about it. But if I have the part written out that I'm going to be on camera, it's easier for me to not ramble. Because I'm like, the last word I'm going to say is like 3 people scored in double figures. And then I know that they're going to take the video right after that. I'm like, okay, I can look down, make sure I hit every point, and then I can just come back on and like close it out. But it's not always easy because you sometimes don't have time. Because it's like the game ended at like 9:30 and you have to be live at like 9:50, and then you still have to cut the highlights and send them back, and then you still have to set up your shot, and because you don't have a camera person most of the time, and you're sending your own video back. So it's like sometimes I'm like, I was so bad I didn't even want to watch back because I just like had no idea what I just said because it was just so quick. But then when you watch it back, it's never that's the thing. I think that when we did our high school football shows here, normally, so it's like an hour-long show. It's like 30 minutes. It's like 20 minutes on the NBC like air, and then we go on to Facebook Live. So like total, it's like 50 minutes or something crazy. And normally it would be 2 of us in the station doing the highlights, and then 1 person at the game of the week. But this year we weren't allowed for 2 of us to be in the station. So it was like me and Curtis were out in the field, and Nick, when he was still here, was in studio. And then once he left, it was just Curtis in the studio and me in the field. So it was so much live because we had to film a show and there were only 2 of us. So they'd be like, let's go back out take like what else can you tell us about games? I would just have to like talk about the game, and it made me a lot more comfortable not being on a script and not like and being okay with messing up. Not messing up, but like if I didn't know, if I was still trying to think, like just like talking and not sounding so scripted. So now looking at the show last year versus this year, I'm like, oh my God, it's like night and day because I was forced to not be on a script. So I think as you get more comfortable, you just like you're comfortable enough on air that you're worrying about how you sound, because you know, reporters kind of like change their voices to sound like a specific way. Like I used to try to be like sounding so like, reporterish. For news, you kind of have to when you're talking about something like sad. But now I just talk how I'm talking now, and when I watch it back, I'm like, I sound so much better, like so much more relatable and conversational. So I think it's just experience, like on-air experience just helps you. And then if you're in a time crunch and you're like not about to get your highlights back, it's like, it's not the end of the world. I used to think it was like, I'm getting fired. I was like, this is it. My career is over. And then they're like, oh, we can just push you down to like the B block. And you're like, oh, okay, it's not that big of a deal. When the game ends late or like your computer freezes, just like technology makes it harder for sure.
Yeah.
But you kind of just like roll with it. And then as you realize it's not that serious. Like if you make a mistake, no one really is going to say anything. Sure.
Well, that's great. And yeah, that's the key, I think, for anybody. Like just how do you have a conversation, but how do you have it when it's just you in front of the camera and you're trying to be perfect?
There's no one there. I feel like it's more awkward when you're talking to a person because you're like, they're looking at everything about me. When you're talking to the camera, there's literally no one there. That's what I tell people in the industry. I'm like, we look at our phones, we talk to like videos on like Snapchat and stuff. Like it's literally the same thing. No one's actually like physically watching me in person. So it's not that awkward. It's more awkward when you're like in studio and there's like so many people watching.
Got it.
Yes.
That's real interesting. And, you know, obviously you're reporting after, you know, if there is a Baylor game, you know, you're reporting after the games, after they end outside the Farrell Center. You know, let's dive into a little bit of your thoughts on the teams. I'd love to, you know your thoughts. Let's start with the Lady Bears. They're still playing, so you know, let's start there. What do you just general thoughts, you know, first impressions, if you will.
So last year I was like, because they were coming off winning the national championship, like everyone was so high on them. So I was like, oh, this team is like unbeatable. Like they're so good, which they are still so good. But I think this year, not only with COVID, but they have like a lot of younger players, and then they have obviously like they're without like Lauren Cox and Juicy. So like the people that some of the staple people on the team are gone. And then they have like Dee Richards playing at point, which she wasn't last year. So I think like there's still that learning curve, but the fact that they've only lost 2 games, and one of them was after like they were shut down for 2 weeks, and then one of them was only, I think it was like by 4 points or something. So I think that people are just like, because there's not that like really elite team in girls basketball this year, that I think the national championship is like open. Like I think they can get upset in the first round, or they can win the national championship. I just think like maybe not every team, but within the top 25 in women's, I think like the top 7, like any of them. I think any of them can make it to the Final Four. So with that being said, I think that the women's basketball team this year is just, they're always so impressive, but I think it's even more impressive because they haven't had as many practices as they normally would. They have young players, they have transfers, and then they have like the people that are returning at different positions, and they're still only have 2 losses, and they're by less than 5 points. One of them was after COVID. So, I mean, I think they play Texas on Sunday, and then they don't have that many games left.
They just rescheduled.
Yeah. So I think that they're gonna. This is my take. I wouldn't say they'd win the Big 12 tournament. I think that someone else is gonna win the Big 12 tournament, and I maybe think that for men's. I don't know. I'm still debating my thoughts. But I think women's, I think they need to lose another game before like the postseason starts, because when you lose and then you're on a high, then like eventually you're going to have a bad game, and then you don't want it to be in the NCAA tournament.
Right.
So I think the men's team is like a powerhouse. Like it's really hard for them to be beat, but the women's team, like there could be hiccups just because of like they're young, and then there's like new players and stuff. But I think it's more impressive this year for sure because of all those things plus COVID. I would say they're going to make it to like the Elite 8. I don't know if they'll make it to the Final Four. It depends if they're healthy, but I don't know. I think any team could upset anyone this year, especially on the women's side. Like UConn
Yes.
just beat the number one team, and then they lost, and then South Carolina, like, you just don't know. So.
Well, Beckers was so, I don't know if you watched that game or saw highlights, but Beckers in the final.
Yes, when it like bounced up and then went, because my brother goes to UConn. He's like, did you see that? And I'm like, because Dan Hurley was the coach at URI. Now he's the head coach at UConn. So like, I love him. I like message him. I'm like, great game. But my brother is always like, the women's team is actually sick. And like, my brother doesn't really follow women's basketball, but he's like, they're like, the campus actually loves the women's basketball team. Like, that's like here at Baylor. Like, people equally like the girls' basketball team as much as the men's. So it's like,
it's a bummer when that game got canceled.
You know, and then the Gonzaga Baylor game. So it's like every good game we're about to get is just not happening. So now we need all of them to meet in the national championship for the Final Four.
Yes, yeah. Just watching that UConn South Carolina game, I was like, okay, I could maybe see these two teams as maybe a little step above, but like you, I've been saying all season, just because of COVID and everything, like the top 15 women's basketball teams.
Yeah, it could be anyone.
And any one of those teams, I think, could get to a Final Four.
And I think a lower team can absolutely upset one of the top five. I just think like when Iowa State beat Baylor, like we knew they were good, but I was like, when you watch them, you're like, okay, their rankings like really don't mean anything, because like they were playing way better than even though they had small COVID. Just like, it just depends who's playing better that night, I think, or who hit their shots, especially when like the threes aren't as like easy to pull as the men's team, I feel. It just depends. The other day, Baylor hit like 7 threes in the game high for them. And some games they could have 0. It's just like, it just depends who's on that night. So I think the tournament's going to be interesting for the girls more than the guys, I think.
Yeah, there's definitely a lot of parity there. The guys definitely seems to be, just the Baylor Gonzaga. You mentioned that Baylor, the women's team has, and last thing on the women's side, but that they have a young team. I think there are definitely some young players, but I think there's more experience than people kind of nationally or hopefully give them credit for, because I think the key is like newness and the cohesive.
Yeah, it's not even that they're like freshmen. It's just that like they all hadn't played together. So it's like, it's not like young, but it's just like different. It's new. Yeah. It's just not like the team that was here last year, and then even the players that were on it last year, they're like at different positions, or like they're getting way more minutes than they were. They didn't start last year. So I think like, because
like
Tish was her, she was on it, and then Lauren Cox, and then Juicy Landrum. So there was like those three I felt like were the only people I was like hearing scoring. And then Dee was like so good defensively, and now she's at point, which is like different. And then you have Dejanay, who's like killing it this year, and Melissa Smith. Like, well, all these players were also good last year, but you know what I'm saying? It's just like, it's just different. And then they didn't get the summer practices like they would have, and then they take a 2-week break. So it's definitely just like a different vibe, and that's why I think it's even more impressive, because to be this good again this year when everything has changed, because the men are kind of like pretty much the same. A lot of it's the same.
Yeah, and Melissa and Dee, they played quality minutes and were valuable contributors in that national championship game in Tampa.
Yeah.
So I think that could be, it's not like they have 10 freshmen that they're playing, or 10 underclassmen that they're playing. I think that could tilt the scales in their favor, in March.
Have people that have gone all the way and like know what it takes.
Right. I think that could be an advantage, especially in a year where anybody could, conceivably get there and win. On the flip side, on the men's side, there definitely seems to be, that major gap between Baylor Gonzaga, which of course we didn't get that game, unfortunately, and then the rest of, the nation, right, where everybody's kind of beating everybody, beating up on each other, and the only teams that seem to win consistently night after night are the Zags and the Bears. What, I'm curious, because you did cover Baylor last year. Mm-hmm. What were the biggest steps to you that they took from last year to this year? Because they seem to be just on another level.
I think so the thing is, like, last year they were ranked number 1. So like if people don't really like follow it, they'd be like, oh, they were better last year. But like I think there's nothing like specifically that's like, oh, they improved on this or this. They're just like, I think all together as a team, there's way more chemistry, and there was way more like, they're just like gelled together more on offense and defense. So it's like, I was saying this yesterday, the reason they're so good is because, first of all, their starting five is just as good as the players that come off the bench. So it's like last year I feel like their bench players were as good, but I think like now they have Jonathan Chamachachua, who like last year, like, I don't know, I feel like a lot of these guys that are getting all these minutes this year, like you just didn't hear about because there were other guys. But like Jonathan Chamachachua and like Flo Thamba, even I feel like last year it just went over my head. Like I didn't like really, because you had like Freddie, and now I think when they're tired, the starting five, the next 3 or 4 guys that come in are equally as good. Like if they were at a different school, they would be starting. So for other teams, their best players go out, and you could tell like there's a little bit of a gap between their bench players and their starters. But for Baylor, there's not. Like no matter who's on the court, they're still equally as good, both offensively and defensively. So I think that is different. Like last year it was kind of the same, but it's certainly a huge step above. I think. I feel like it's like no matter who's on the floor, they're beating up the team on both sides. So, and also what we always hear about is how they're like all great friends and they just like want to help each other. And I think that does translate in the fact that like when someone's having a good night, they give that guy the ball. Like they're not trying to get their own shots. And then like when Davion Mitchell was hitting all those threes, like Jared Butler could have totally hit a 3, like there was no one on him, but then he like giving it to him to shoot. So I think like it makes it hard to watch even. But I also think that the teams are playing against you, this is going to be a good game, and they just dominate. So I need to see that play Gonzaga. That's what I need. I like need to see that. I think they've already beat everyone. Right? They played everyone except West Virginia.
Except West Virginia. Yeah.
So and like they've beaten everyone. So it's like okay, we need some other, but we need Gonzaga because really I think like who's under Michigan in the AP this week.
Yeah, Villanova at a point. Michigan, I think, is now because.
And I just think they're like far better than all of those teams, right. Except Gonzaga, which I have like a different thought on Gonzaga than everyone else. Like I understand that they are like they've been ranked on one, not to swap it. But their conference schedule is so much easier. Like I feel like you can't compare like the teams they're playing to who Baylor's playing since they were always ranked number 1. Like they have a loss, and they're not like even losing. Like, they're not winning by close amounts. So I get why they're still at number 1, and like Baylor doesn't even receive that many votes to be number 1. But I just think like it would surprise people if they saw them play each other, how good Baylor is, if that makes sense.
I agree. I think Baylor would beat Gonzaga, and my confidence in that has grown as the season has progressed. I will say I think the reason why Gonzaga is that clear number 1 still is because they played such a good non-conference schedule.
I know, yeah. And then Baylor didn't really get to play any. Baylor played like random teams when they had to not go to the, what was it, Bubbleville or whatever that one was, League and Sun. So I think it would have been different if they played like Villanova or what was like Seton Hall, like all those better teams, and they played like Louisiana and stuff. So I think that kind of messed up the rankings. So because like right now they're not just going to switch them, like they're still winning, so they're not going to just swap them. And now Baylor is not going to play for a while. But I think it's going to be difficult coming back and playing Oklahoma State. So they're still supposed to play Oklahoma State, but we like who knows? I think that'll be difficult because last time they played, they didn't have Cade Cunningham in. Now they're going to have him in, and Oklahoma State kind of gave around in the first half of the time. So now coming off of we don't even know when they stop practicing. Really, we don't know exactly. It's like going to be a while, and then they're going back and it was like a good team. So I don't know. My thoughts about men, like I think they lose like now or like lose sooner rather than later, because if you think about it, no team has ever went undefeated and won the national championship since like 70s.
Yeah, 76.
Like Kentucky almost did it, I think, when I was a senior, so like 2015, and then they lost. And someone else did it, I forget who, and then lost in the Final Four. So I don't know. I don't want to say it, but I think they'll probably lose my game or you don't want to lose in NCAA, so you're not supposed to lose.
Yeah, there are two schools in spot, right? And I find it interesting because there's a great article in Sports Illustrated that I saw last night about Gonzaga. It's the new cover story for their, I think, March issue, and about how Gonzaga, kind of just talk about the team, how great they are, and the opportunity that they could run the table in a much easier conference, right, and potentially could finish as undefeated national champions, and kind of what that would mean historically. And I feel like Baylor is in the same boat. They have the same opportunity. And what I've been saying for a while now is I think that this Baylor team could go down, Baylor or Gonzaga really, but Baylor could go down as the best team in college basketball history, not just, this century or,
And they don't even get as much like hype because everyone's like so hyped up on Gonzaga.
Yes. It's so weird.
Not as good. And everyone's like, Niki, that's a bad take. I'm like, okay, it might be for you because like you're looking at all like the numbers and stuff and what they did in preseason, which I get, but at the same time, like the teams are different in preseason. Like they're not as the teams you play, like, yes, they're but they're not as good in preseason. They're kind of like better. I think if you play the same teams you beat in non-conference in the NCAA tournament, they're going to be significantly better at the end of the season, unless they had like COVID or something that like made them worse. Right. So I think that it just because also Gonzaga is like one of those teams that's always been good. Like everyone just like puts them way higher up than Baylor, even though like last year Baylor was good and this year they're good, which I think is better. I think you'd rather be looked at as like the number 2 team, like, oh, Gonzaga is the favorite, blah, blah, because it's like less like, eyes, and when they do it, you're like, totally.
It's very interesting. I think because Gonzaga got to play all that tough non-conference competition, the Virginias, the Iowas, the Kansases, they got that extra boost, right? The perception, and Baylor didn't. They had to cancel against the Villanovas, the Seton Halls, the Arizona States, and play Louisiana and Washington out like in a week.
They were just blowing out,
And so I think that just from a mental perception across the nation, like kind of anchored folks to think, oh, well, Baylor's not that good. But I think as the season's gone on, culminating in the win over Texas in Austin, it's just like, hey, now they become common opponents of Gonzaga.
Yeah, a lot of like analysts are like, I think that like they're thinking Baylor over Gonzaga. Just like I think the polls don't mean anything, and the people that are voting are not. There's not, unless one of the teams loses. People are saying, oh, they're going to drop people because they're playing, but like, I just think that they have a lot. Like, why would the team go above them? So like, the polls don't really matter. Able to see, because I think this year is the year where a 1 seed will get upset, just like what happened with Virginia, because people are sick or people have been off for weeks, and then players are not 100%, and then they don't get practice time. And now with the tournament all being in one area, it's like a quicker turnaround. And I just think it leaves more room for someone to get upset. And it's 2021. Like we just like a random team could win the national championship that no one's thinking of. So I don't know. Like I, for some reason, just feel like there's going to be like a random Cinderella in the Final Four this year. Just because of the year it is, and because of the fact that if one team is sick, like what do? They just don't play? Are they out? It's like if it's in a bubble, I guess like, it's not going to happen, but you just don't know. There's just so much room for like we don't know.
Yeah, we just don't know. It's kind of just at this point, just hoping we can get to the finish line and hoping we can play and get there.
I think it's smart that everything's in the same area, but at the same time, like. The Big Ten moved their tournament to Indianapolis. The Big 12 is in Kansas City. They might just like, is that smart? Like, I feel like all conference championship should be canceled because why are we going to bring everyone to one area, risk someone having an outbreak, and then what happens? You can't quarantine for 2 weeks because there's not even 2 weeks in between. So it's like, I understand people's thoughts, especially in conferences where you kind of already know who's going to be on the bracket. So it's like, but then in smaller conferences, people are like, no, look, we have a chance if we win. So it's like, it's just all, I think some conferences will probably cancel, if I had to guess. And then some will keep theirs at like schools or like the higher seed will hold it.
It'll be interesting. It'll be interesting to say the least. So I guess my hope and I would say prediction as well is that we have, I'll say my prediction is Baylor Gonzaga in the national championship.
Yeah.
And my hope would be that both of those teams can be undefeated because I think that would just be.
Yeah, that would be really. Has that ever happened? No.
I'm almost positive no.
Because I think that isn't the last team that was undefeated up until the Final Four was Kentucky.
Kentucky 15.
So the team they were playing wasn't like the other teams in the Final Four weren't. So I guess yeah, probably not. I'd have to look back, but that would be nuts.
It'd be
because you think about it, like who's going to beat Baylor and who's going to beat Gonzaga unless Baylor loses like the game they come back, or Gonzaga's not losing. Their conference is not good. Like I'm sorry, it's not. Like there's no one in that conference that's going to beat them unless they had like some type of like, I don't know, they just had a bad game, like a really bad game. But I think Baylor is more likely to lose because the Big 12 is just better.
Yeah, no, I 100% agree.
Kansas, like, probably has a bad taste in their mouth, and that's their final game of the regular season. And then West Virginia, do we think they're going to make these up? But they can't. Right?
I don't know. I hope we get one against West Virginia, just so we.
Yeah, because they haven't played them, so it's kind of like unfair. Everyone else we already have seen.
Yeah.
And I think Oklahoma State could totally win, especially at full strength.
Best of anybody.
They haven't even been at full strength against them, and they almost won.
Yeah.
And we don't know if Baylor will be at full strength when they come back. Like, they might have players out.
They might be missing people or play. It's all up in the air. So
I know we like know nothing. I'm like, like what if just like three of the best players are out? Just don't know.
Yeah. So yeah, it's really up in the air, and like I said, I think it's just a hope that we get there. So that's.
I know. I think everyone deserves the Baylor and Gonzaga national championship. Like we've been through a lot. We need this game.
We need that. So, no, well, great. I did have a few just other questions, kind of go rapid fire here, but I thought were interesting. Just looking at your profile and kind of reading your bio on KCEN. So if that's good with you, I'll want to ask you just a couple questions. And thank you again for coming on. But you know, I guess what would be your favorite story that you've reported on or done? Could be, you know, interview story for, you know, sports. It could be Rhode Island, Baylor.
I think my favorite story I've ever done was when I went to Navarro for the cheer. Like when Netflix did cheer, and it was at Navarro. I had like followed that school since I was a little kid because I used to do competitive cheerleading. So I was like, I'm gonna go there for college. And my parents were like, you know, this is like community college. Like, why would you go to Texas for community college when like we have community colleges here? And I was like, no, they're the best cheer team in the entire world. And like everyone thought I was out of my mind, which I obviously didn't end up doing. But when I moved here, I was like, Navarro is only like an hour away, and everyone's like, Navarro, what are you saying? And I was like, no, I know the cheer team. And then Netflix did the show, and everyone was like, I love this school. So I pitched go in and do a story, and they were like, yeah. So then I with them, and that's when I low key like fangirling. I have literally loved this coach. I was like 8, and that's just so cool. This is like full circle. Like, I never when I was young thought I'd be anywhere near the school, and then I like got to do it for work. So that was like my favorite thing. It wasn't like a feel good story, but like for me personally, I was like, my life has come full circle. So I will like never forget that was like the best thing I've ever done in my reporting career, which sounds stupid. People will be like, not like Baylor being number 1. Like, well, that's cool, but like the story, that was like my favorite thing.
So can you do like all those crazy flips and things like that?
I don't think anymore. Like when I was there, they were like, oh, tumble. And I was like, okay, I could do like a back handspring, but like what they do, no. I've never been able to do that. I wouldn't have even made the team if my parents let me go there. But I was like so starstruck, and it was so cool. And like,
Wow.
the fact that I'm only like 30 minutes away.
Yeah, that's really cool. What you know, we just had the Super Bowl this past weekend. I see that you're a Chiefs fan. What's the connection? How are you a Kansas City Chiefs fan?
Okay, it's just like random. My dad, when he was younger, the Jets and Giants, like, because my parents are from New York, he just didn't like them. He was like, they're not good. So he would just watch the Chiefs games, and they were on Sundays, and he liked their uniform colors. Like, he was obsessed with the colors. So he became a diehard Chiefs fan from when he was like 5 years old. And then my parents have known each other since first grade. So my mom was like, Joe Lattarulo always used to wear like Chiefs colors. And it's so weird because like, why does he like them? And then when they started dating, she became a Chiefs fan. And then from when we were younger, we were just raised Chiefs fans. I didn't even know like where Kansas City was. When I was younger, I thought that they were like, I was confused why everyone was confused why I was a Chiefs fan. And then when I was in like second grade, it was pictured, because I went to private school, so I had a uniform. I was like wearing like a Chiefs bow or something, and everyone was like, that's not even near here. And I was like, oh. And then it was like, my parents were like, we just were Chiefs fans forever, and they were bad. And then as we got older, like me, my brother, and my sister, like never changed our thoughts. Like, no, I was only England, my sister was only England, we were diehard Chiefs forever. And then when they got good, people were like, you're a bandwagon. I hate when people say that. I was like, listen, I've been a Chiefs fan since it was like Tyler Thigpen, Matt Castle. Like, come on, you can't even fault me here. So we try to go to games. My brother, my dad fly out to Arrowhead every year for like a playoff game, or just a game. But we used to go to the playoff games when they were playing in New England against Tom Brady. So the fact that it was like Tom Brady like hurt, he had to make it and they had to win, but they deserve to lose because they played bad. But I'm not worried. I think they'll totally be back.
No, that's awesome. And it's funny that's how your dad kind of liked the team. When I was about that same age, I was living in Pennsylvania in Philadelphia, and you know, the Eagles weren't quite good, and I kind of became a Denver Broncos fan because I liked the orange and blue.
Yeah, and then you just stick with it, and everyone's like, "Why?" And you're like, "Because."
Yeah, I'm not as diehard now, but I was definitely, you know.
I think we'll keep the legacy on. Like when my sister has kids, when I have kids, my brother, we're all just gonna like raise everyone. Well, my sister's boyfriend is like a diehard Patriots fan. She doesn't Boston, and she's like, no. Like same with the Yankees. We're like, no one's becoming a Boston fan in our family, so it's not happening.
Not happening. You know, Kansas City are like, all right, we'll make it work. Not doing Boston. That's so funny. Let's see. I see. You know, on your profile, you said that where it said something about competitive Jeopardy matches with your family, and I was kind of just curious about that. How big's your family? How intense do these Jeopardy matches get?
Okay, so once again, my parents have been together for so long. Like they've been married like 30 years, but they've known each other for like their whole lives. So when we were younger, they would always have like competitive Jeopardy. Like they record it. Like they record every Jeopardy. So when they miss it, they're like, let's play Jeopardy. And then they just watch it back, and they have tournaments. And they have like this index card that I don't know how long it takes back for. But they're like, my mom's like winning like 107 to like 85. But they keep track of every game and like who wins every like match, I guess. And there's no like prize. You do it all the time. So when we were younger and like in high school, we would play with them. And now we're like, none of us are home. But when we go home, we're like, okay, I'll play. And my mom is significantly better. My dad will never. He's like, it's because she yells over the TV. I can't hear. Like, that's why she wins. I'm home. And me, my brother, my sister know just way more because, you know, there's like random like science or history. It's like things I just randomly come up with from school. I'm like, how do you know that? I'm like, I was like just in high school. I feel like I just learned that in like chemistry. But we all just like play, and it's like so rowdy. I have like the most Italian family that like my mom will be like screaming the answer. My dad's like, I need to rewind. I can't hear. And then my brother, we're like, okay, I'm giving the points. My dad, like, he's probably like regular bit. It's just like funny. So I think it's like, and then now that Alex Trebek died, my family was like, oh my God, it's just not going to be the same. Like, I feel like I've just like watched him my whole life. So it's funny. It's a good time. We always do it. I'm like, wait, you got to wait for me to get home. Play it. I'm going to play. They take it seriously. They're not joking around.
Yeah, no, they play along. That's fantastic. I love it.
It's funny.
I love it. Last question. I see your dog in the background there. He's adorable. What type of dog is he?
He's a mini golden doodle. Gino. He's fun. I got him during quarantine because I live here alone. So I was like, I need my family has a golden doodle that we had just gotten when I moved here. And I like loved it. I was so sad that I couldn't be there. And then my parents were like, why don't you get a dog? And I was like, I can't get a dog. I'm not really like a dog person. I'm like my family's dog person. I'm not like a dog person. And then I kind of like so like your home quarantine. Like I literally need something. I'm so bored. So we got a dog. Like it was kind of a spur of the moment thing. Nice. People are like, what do you mean? Like with your job, how do you have a dog? And I'm like, thank God. Like now I can't imagine not having him, like obsessed with him as if it's my child. And when I go places, there's like a girl in my apartment that like loves him and she just watches him. When I was at high school football, she'd like come let him out, thank God. But everything has worked out. Now if he travels for the tournament, like where he's gonna go. But I couldn't imagine without him. And he's so cute. He's hyper. But one time we were in a Kim multi-presser and like someone from ESPN was like, Kim, Gino said something. I guess Gino was like a reporter or something. And he heard his name and he came out. He's flying off the couch thinking that someone was talking to him. I was like laughing. I was like, I don't know if anyone sees me. He just like hears one thing and like right now he's being good. He goes from hyper to like sleeping. There's no routine. But he's the best. He's a baby. His birthday's in March, so he's almost 1.
He's almost 1. Okay.
Yeah, he's like
awesome. That's so great.
I know, he's so cool.
Well, great. Well, hey, those are all my questions. Appreciate you stepping into the Minor Lounge, talking some Baylor hoops, talking about your job at KCEN, and looking forward to the postseason. Hopefully, we can get there.
I know. Hopefully, we're all in one place. I don't know. We gotta see. It's not looking too good.
Yeah. Niki, where can people find you? Where can they find your work?
My Twitter is and my Instagram, they're both the same, at Niki Lattarulo, and same with on Facebook, and Niki Lattarulo, Niki with 1 K for people. Yep, Niki Lattarulo, just everything. My handle is Lattarulo, and I'm on weekends anchoring and reporting your week.
Excellent. Niki Lattarulo with KCEN. Thanks so much for joining the Minor Lounge.
Thank you for having me.